So I'm Scott Wilson. I'm a flash system storage rep here at IBM. Kind of help coordinate these mid-market tech talks. We're joined with our host Roger Caston, and then we've got a cast of panelists with us. We got Chris Volmar, Dan Thompson, and Shu Mukherjee to help the conversation about ransomware and how to protect ourselves and overcome attacks and things of that nature. So. I will monitor the chat room. So if you have any questions, just throw something out there, and between Roger and I, we can throw that to the panels as well. So, Roger, I will let you take it from here. I'll go on mute, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Scott, and hello, everyone. I appreciate you tuning in today and/or whenever in the future you might happen to be listening to this. But we do have a great group of folks with us today, as Scott just indicated. And we have a topic that, if it's not in everybody's top two, then I don't know what you're doing out there, because I cannot speak with a client without having data resilience, ransomware just pop immediately to the top. For many of you who may follow various Slack channels within IBM, it's been very interesting the last couple days to see some items popping up. One of them that was fascinating was a hospital administrator who's just been charged with committing ransomware against other facilities. So it's really scary, because in this case, it's a perfect example. Who do you trust? And the answer is a very, very small group of people is who you trust. And what solution do you use? Well, the sad thing is there is no one solution. If there was, whoever owned it would be just making bank. The reality is it takes a number of tools and solutions to handle this just ever increasing problem. And I'll tell you what, let me just bounce it over. Somebody that I work with quite a bit, Chris Volmar, has joined us today. Let me just bounce it over to Chris and see what you might want to start off mentioning or discussing.
I mean, maybe the way to start, I would say the bigger conversation I have with clients and with people these days is about rapid recovery. Like, what it really starts to come down to is, okay, if you think about, and Roger, you kind of set it up, right? Trust. If you think in terms of that zero trust concept, right? If I'm working as a security professional, or if I'm working with the security team, and that the idea of zero trust is a concept we're working from, right? That's my base structure. It's not a product. It's a base, like, fundamental concept I'm going to work in. I have to assume that there's been breaches. Have to assume that breaches are happening, which leads me to the natural of, okay, if a breach is happening, there's a chance of corruption happening. What's my rapid recovery of clean data conversation? Like, how do I start to put those pins in place? Because at the end of the day, how do I work backwards from there? And if that's my end goal, is, okay, my end goal is I need to be able to recover my data in a rapid fashion, because I can't be down for days, which is, what we see in studies is 23 days is the average recovery time from one of those events. How do I start to think about rapid recovery? And then I got to work my way back from there. If I take that as my end design goal, right?
It makes perfect sense.
And to build upon that, certainly a faster way to recover is a good way to start that, but it also implies that you've planned out your recovery, because recovery from ransomware or any other cyber attack is not just restore my data. There are prep steps. Do I need to make a copy of that? Who's going to be the people that validate the if I restore a VM or a container or a machine, that the OS is not corrupted, doesn't have malware in it? Now the application is going to validate that. And am I doing this in an isolated network and then moving it over? The steps are more complex. So just getting a faster recovery source, which is necessary, it's absolutely necessary, and ideally an immutable one, is only part of the story. You've got to have it pre-planned and ideally where you can go through and it prevents you from missing a step and having to start all over again.
Yeah, and Dan's bang on. Like if I go, everybody knows that or anybody who knows me knows that you put a quarter in my back, I'll talk about enterprise design thinking or something, right? So if that's my end vision goal, Dan, you're bang on, because then I kind of work my way backwards. And whether or not you subscribe to like the NIST framework, that's one of the ones we tend to look at in terms of that NIST cybersecurity framework with the 5 steps. I use that as a lot of my structure to facilitate that design, right? To Dan's point about what's my recovery look like? Who has to be part of that run book or playbook? You know, if I work through my identify, detect, protect, respond, recover, if I work through all those steps, I put them out of order there for you. But if I put those steps, how do all those pieces fit into my design to get me to that? If my North Star is I got to be able to have rapid recovery, you bang on in terms of I got a whole bunch of steps I got to think my way through, practices, structures, like, and I'll say one of the things that we end up doing a lot is integrating with the security team. I'm actually sitting with a bunch of the IBM security team right now. How do I integrate both me as infrastructure, as a storage person? How do I tie back with security, whether they're IBM security or Splunk or something else? How do I integrate that into those processes Dan is talking about, right? Who is the second set of eyes? Who's the fourth set of eyes? Who's got responsibility and who's on first for what versus, detect, identify, where do you fit in all those, and who's taking the lead and who's supplementing, who's working together, right?
Go ahead, Shir, I'm sorry.
To jump on what Chris and Dan were saying, it's all about the entire process holistically, because I'll talk to a lot of clients and they'll say, well, I do snapshots. I'm protected, right? It's like, it's not just about the technology. You've got to, back in the day where you say software drives hardware, I think this process needs to drive security. You need to have those steps in place, not just to protect your data, but to recover it, but also to do the triage from the actual cyber attack that's happening. Because you don't want to recover the data while the cyber attack's happening. You're just going to have this reinforcing cycle of corruption if you do that. So you really have to, like Chris said, work with the security team and say, what's your process in this? And then wrap technology into that process and allow that process to drive your solution. Like Defender. I'm trying to do a plug for you, Chris.
Hey, there you go.
And to build upon that integration, it's not just in the recovery process, right? It's got to be in the day-to-day stuff. If you have great security and great data protection, but they're not part of the same design, there's a big gap and there's things that are going to fail. I need to know if someone's attacking my backups and reporting that to the security team. I need to know if the security team has detected a specific type of attack. I don't want to recover a database that's inaccessible if the database is fine, but someone screwed up my DNS, right, or my AD, right? I got to know exactly, and that if we don't work hand in glove, it's going to fail. It'll just be a cycle of repeat and try this and that. Sorry, you hit a nerve.
No, you hit it bang on. Well, and like I'll kind of go off of that in terms of like the way I do it, and I don't mean to, or the way I look at it, and I don't mean to drop into how, but like I get all those questions of, okay, Chris, where's that integration point? And a lot of it is you're sitting in rooms and meetings going, who do you need me to do? What do you need me to do? And then how does that coalesce into reality? You'll see me do conversations with the security team around a SOAR, a security automation or an orchestration automation response tool. It doesn't have to be whoever's it might be, but that lets me then build out my structure. I'm looking for the right word. Like I refer to as a playbook, and you'll see that the playbook is a flow chart or whatever of here are the steps we're going to do as I step through them. And that's where I see that kind of rubber hit the road in terms of how are you connecting the two teams, right? And some of that you build your automation, and some of that like tasks I'm going to have me as a storage person doing to do that recovery. And to Shu's point, while security is actually, doing the remediation and fencing off and cleaning out and all that stuff, I might be over in the corner in a clean room testing valid copies. But that all gets kind of knitted together in the idea of who's doing what. It starts with the design of, okay, what are each of our responsibilities? And if I use the NIST framework or whatever during each of these steps, whose responsibilities, and then how do I put it into place? Like, I like that idea of that sort because it gets me a playbook, task list, for lack of a better way to put it. But then I know who's on first, and I know what, and I pre-program what I'm doing, because I think Dan will probably tell you, like, the last thing you want to be doing is making it up as you go, trying to recover an environment that you've had an event in, right? You want to think your way through the paths to know, okay, if this is a situation, that's the situation. Here's what our response is, and here's what our run book is, our playbook is, so that we know what we're doing, right?
The interesting thing about a kind of that run book, that work, the decision tree kind of process, what if this, do this, what are my options, is part of any really good design, especially here, is going to be something you can test and test and test.
Mm-hmm.
And you can test a workflow, a decision tree on the whiteboard, as long as the people are in the room and they're willing to say, I don't like that I worry about that. We're assuming that will work. What could go wrong? You could tear that apart and get something a little robust, and then go to the implementation side and then really test it. And as long as you're tough on each other.
Sorry.
I'll say, as long as you're tough on each other, it'll work.
Exactly. I mean, Dan's got a really good point. So I had a chance to experiment or work a little bit with QRadar SOAR in conjunction with Flash Systems, and that's a great way to build out that process. And to Dan's point, it's because again, we talk to IT people and they're all interested about the technology. Let's have the redundancy. Let's have the backups and the remote copy and all that. But what about your process? Maybe there's redundancies in your process that you can streamline that would drive your technology. So again, it's very much, as Chris and Dan are both saying, a hand-in-hand conversation around the technology and the process, and testing both of those things to ensure not only do you get protection, but also the recovery when you need it.
And I'd almost add to Shu's point there that, like, whereas when we used to do DR tests, they were always big and mean and ugly, and I got to move a whole network and I got to go to the other site. We'd only do it once a year in a lot of cases because, like, there's a lot of lift there. I think because we generally plan for those kind of hits and those cyber impacts, that the blast radius is not as big as a DR event, potentially. Could totally be, but potentially it may not, the blast radius may not be as big. I also, having that idea of playbooks or run books or practice, I think there's an opportunity to practice more often and then play through those scenarios to continually do the loop of process, right? The infinite loop and design of keep and practice, iterate as a way to do it. So, like, maybe there is more room for us to go do more testing and then play with a few things to figure out what will work and what wouldn't. Whereas before, like I said, with DR, it's a big heavy lift over here and then it's a big heavy lift over there, right? So, which is intimidating in some ways.
If you think of the blast radius, and I'm going to use MGM Grand's attack as an example, we typically think of a disaster or a business continuity exercise hitting an application, a site, or something. It hit MGM Grand and Bellagio and Atlantic City. The connection is the logical connection. It's not physical. It's not a floor, a side, a building. So it's a completely different thing, and you have to test it as a different thing.
And I think that's a really good point as well, because that's one thing I've seen folks kind of fall into the trap of I have disaster recovery. We're good. It's an entire, like, I use the example of, we have a bunch of muscle memory from how we've been doing for DR for years, right? All of us who've been in storage for a long time, you have all this muscle memory. I got to use the muscles in a different way. And I might have to actually go do different muscles or something. Like, there's a lot of learnings we've got from having done all of our DR planning. I got to apply those with a different lens now because of the nuances or the differences, because it is no longer the tornado ate the data center or the rack got knocked over from the fire suppressant. It is very much I've lost this collection of things, or that, or this, the spread is across two logical sites, and here's the impact of the blast. So I can use the stuff I've learned, but I got to do it a different way, and I can't rely on DR to be my recovery point too, right?
Well, and you can think of a cyber attack as disaster that fights back. Right.
Well,
A lot
I like that
of
analogy.
failure is human failure. So once again, I'm harping on the MGM Grand. Someone pretended to be an executive or high up in the hierarchy, and they reached a person who wasn't secure enough that they could say no to say no. So they just did what they were told. So part of the processing is enabling and saying it's zero trust. Someone calls up and they're pretending to be the hard case VP of the application that makes all the money and they're yelling. You're perfectly protected if you tell them, no, we won't do that just because the voice on the phone says. And so much of these attacks start with human engineering, someone getting an account.
Yep.
And so we got to make sure Shu and I are managing the backup and the storage. If someone gets my account, I can't go through and destroy every copy of the primary and the snapshots and the secondary. There's got to be the security settings so that we have to authenticate each other and approve each other on certain types of activities. And outside of a certain domain, I can't even try, right? We got to break it up somewhere. So, you had said earlier, I trust a very few number of people. You almost have to pretend no one's trustworthy because anyone can be compromised.
Dan teed
Well,
up
this
some
is actually, I was going to say, guys, this is actually great because we just lobbed one simple question out there and we just got all of that from you. And the wonderful thing is, I think it illustrates to people on this call, this is not a simple issue. I mean, the goal is simple. What we want to achieve is easy, but getting there, that's where the planning comes in. And the three of you, you did a wonderful job in bringing up a number of things. For any of you on this call who are IBMers, coming up next month is, anyone at IBM is familiar with it, is an SKO, a sales kickoff. And I was just editing a deck yesterday that will be used. And in it, there were 2 slides that looked at a client who suddenly has a cyber issue. And one of those clients is very poorly protected. The other is running flash system using IBM's inline data corruption detection, using various elements of Defender, which Shu mentioned a few moments ago. And they're also utilizing QRadar SOAR. And what we're able to show in just 2 slides is the difference when you have a well-crafted plan in place. And yesterday, IBM had an excellent webinar that Chris was one of the presenters at, along with Christian Burns and a gentleman named Del Hubler. And they were discussing a component, an ability of Defender. And that ability or capability is called Data Protect. And what I really liked is what you 3 gentlemen just talked about. They addressed to a large degree in that webinar. They talked about what's required to protect. And in this case, they were looking at protecting a virtual environment. But I've been working with Chris, and he's been showing me a number of fascinating things. And I want to throw something out just for the folks on this webinar, because it's just not intuitively obvious. We've all gotten used to hearing the word immutable. Safeguarded copy gives you immutable snapshots. Well, the thing is, we've also gotten kind of lazy, because safeguarded copy is immutable, can't be changed or altered once it's taken, but it also can't be deleted. That's just automatic unless you are the correct security person. But what was fascinating to me was discovering that Data Protect, when it takes backups, they are immutable, but they can be deleted unless you tell them not to be deleted. So I guess I'm lobbing another hand grenade out here to just let you guys delve a little deeper. And I just want the audience to keep in mind, don't get lazy and don't make assumptions, because that is where you just go downhill really quick. And, Chris, I don't know if you want to touch a little bit, since I mentioned it, Data Protect and how it deals with snaps.
Well, I'll do a couple of things. One, I'll say, always remember it's a journey. I was having this conversation this morning with a group of our channel partners. It's a journey. I'm not going to get to my perfect end state day one. It's just, there's too much to do. And it's one of those ones I'm going to iteratively evolve. I'm going to add, craft, refine, things like that. I'll be bringing in either tooling or process. So it's not like I'm going to get to my end goal within a day. I can't just drop everything on the floor and fix it. Second one is you're right around in Defender and in Data Protect. I've got the ability to deliver immutability to the backups, and then I can restrict their deletion, same the way I do, or similar way I do in Flash System Safeguarded Copy. But this is also one of those things of, to your point of complacency, it's down to us as the team implementing, as the team designing, as the team using, as the customer is using. I have to be able to leverage all of it, right? So I'll talk to you about multi-factor authentication. I can do that on the Flash system. If you forgot to set it up, that's okay. You can go set it up tomorrow on with IBM Verify. Similarly in Defender, I'm using multi-factor authentication. The idea of, and when I'm building my data policies, I would be flipping that data lock flag to hold on to the data for however long I want, so it can't be deleted even by an admin. I've got these tools. I have to make sure that I'm remembering and I'm being cognizant of how do I use them. And one of those things is that you get all these knobs and levers. Sometimes you got to dig into the knobs and levers because they start to be, oh, okay, here's the policy I want to build around that. Here's the ability I want to make sure that I'm accessing appropriately. I've built in all the proper safeguards. So maybe the way I'll spin it back out to everybody is, I've got all the tools. I also have to make sure I use them all, and I use them appropriately and design my processes around them, because I also want to say, all right, just because it's immutable, I don't want to get caught because I didn't necessarily check all of the knobs and levers that I want to do that fits what I want to do to protect, or fits at my environment, fits my design goal. And Dan, I think you talk about this a lot too when we talk about, is my backup environment sitting in Active Directory? Should it be? Just because I can, should I type of thing, right? How do I design my processes as well, right?
So I'd like to back up for just a second and kind of so say something that Roger and you both said. When we look back at our cyber resiliency, the first thing everyone thought is I need air gap backups, because that's what the FBI said when they first started looking. I think it was Sony was hit real hard. And then it was immutability. And then immutability was everything. And then I need faster recovery, so I need snapshots. If you take that zero trust and say, if I'm going to assume any one account, one person can be compromised, I also need to do the same thing with every part of my infrastructure and assume as unlikely as it will ever be that this component is ever compromised, the firmware is attacked. We're seeing the sophistication grow, where it's the old school, very sophisticated attacks are now the simple ones. They're obsolete. We've got, I call it, hobby grade, consumer grade, business grade, and military grade skills out there. And so you have to enable everything. You have to have lots of sets of eyes to validate that every security thing. You also have to decide, what if the directory goes down? Am I completely down? But you also say, I can't rely on just one copy. I need a copy in snapshots, but I need a copy of that snapshot in Data Protect or on object storage or on tape, perhaps even a different physical location. Because all we can tell you about what the sophistication of the cyber criminals in 2 years, it's going to be a lot tougher than it is now. And you don't want to find out that you put all your eggs in one basket because you thought that was the best basket and everyone agreed, but they figured a way to compromise it and my data's gone. So I'm sorry, I kind of went on a left tangent, but
No.
when we were talking about immutability, it kind of reminded me, yeah, it always changes what the answer is. And the only answer is there's not one answer.
To Chris's point, he mentioned there are all kinds of different knobs and dials of your stereo system for the older folks out there who remember that. It's just one of the tools in the toolkit. I had a client who, when we introduced safeguarded copy to him, he was like, "This is great." Like you could see the dollar signs in his eyes and the cash register sound from like a Tex Avery cartoon. Where you're saying, "This is great. I can shut down my DR site because we've got safeguarded copies." Like, no, time out, man. This is one tool. This is just another layer of protection. So, and I've seen a lot of people go in that direction. Well, you've got safeguarded copy. You're safe. No, you're safer. That's definitely a good way to protect your data. But as Dan was saying, there's going to be a war of escalation. There are going to be other ways that the cyber criminals are going to try to attack your data. So you need to make sure you've got that protection on all fronts. And then you've got the technology for the recovery on all fronts as well. So as much as I'm a huge fan of safeguarded copy, that's not the end all be all. That's simply another layer in protection.
I think that's very well stated. And I think you are spot on. For folks who may not be familiar with it, Chris, do you recall the numbers from Dell's presentation yesterday? Because this was the thing that just caught my attention, was when he discussed an actual client incident where the client had decided to utilize Data Protect to protect their virtual environment. And they had, I believe it was almost 16,000 VMs, and it was taking them 4 weeks to recover them in the event of an issue. Do you happen to recall those numbers Dell was presenting them?
I'm gonna try and do a little off the top of my head. And I'll do a little setup as to kind of where Roger's talking about. What, to Roger's point around where we were going and where you're seeing people talk about, like, how do I do my ability to do rapid recovery? Like, that is a lot of that environment. How do I able to recover fast enough? How do I able to bring my environment back up? The idea that we're kind of talking around here is, how do I bring back an environment in a much faster way to do it? And how do I leverage the right technology to do it with, so that I can actually get to the point of what I'm trying to have my environment back up? And this is, to Roger's point, we're talking about an environment that had, use cases of, if I need to bring back 20 VMs, how quickly can I bring back those 20 VMs? And in that process, part of that recovery would be, how do I actually, bring them into a place I might want to test them as well before I promote them back into production. And then if I get to 200 VMs, 300 VMs, what happens if I lose an entire storage device underneath all of those VMDKs? What happens if I lose an entire set of hypervisors? What does that impact look like? And then what is that, when I scope that impact, what does that recovery look like? And then to be able to bring it back up quickly. So to that point, like the idea was really, if I want to do something like an Instant Mass Restore, the testing that we had the one environment going with, this was a customer who was doing it a little while ago, let's say. We were talking about, can I bring stuff back within hours? And I'm actually trying to pull the numbers off the top of my head, and I'm failing a little bit in terms of what those numbers were, as I try to pull out the actual point. There's the number I'm looking for. So, the use case they had was, hey, if I lose something between, say, 300 and 1,200 VMs, their use case at that time was 8 hours. I had a customer who was trying to bring back a similar number of those VMs, and they were into weeks of trying to bring those back. We were able to do with their environment instant recovery of 1,000 VMs in about 39 minutes. So call it 40 minutes to be safe, 45 if you want. So I the goal was, could I bring back, up to 1,000 VMs in 8 hours? We could bring it back in 45 minutes or 40 minutes. Could I bring back hundreds more? I can, it's not an exponential number at that point. I can bring back in the thousands, and I'm doing it in under an hour. That's really, that's the idea of, can I bring all of that up? What Daniel and Chu will tell you is, okay, can I test it next? Oh, hey, what do you know? You found the slide for me. How do I was looking at my other part of the screen. How do I bring those back? And then how do I then test it so I can promote to production?
So, yeah, and I apologize for putting you on the spot, but like I
That's
said,
okay.
folks, I was blown away. And for those of you who may not know it, I wish everybody did at this point, but Data Protect is just one of the elements underneath IBM Storage Defender, sort of our protection umbrella for storage that is a subscription service loaded with multiple capabilities. And, you know, I think Dan and Chris and Shu have said repeatedly, it's not one item, it's multiple things. And you have to tie in your security folks. And so, you know, make no mistake, this is not a simple thing to fix, but I legitimately feel that if you're dealing with IBM, you have a fighting chance, because this is the number one priority with IBM, and particularly IBM storage, is this idea of data resiliency and how can we make it happen. And we've got a lot of folks. We have three incredibly, you know, knowledgeable folks with us right here. And I hate to do it, but we're actually at the end of our time. So let me just do that. Let me go to Chris, then Dan, then Shu, and just let you guys make whatever final comments that you would like to make to the assembled audience.
All right, I'll go first since you named me first. I would say this is an iterative process, and this is all about how do I improve over time. So it isn't, you know, because it can look like a daunting thing at the beginning when you start to think about all of the stuff I got to do. Iterative process, build over time, refine, add, refine, add. That's I think the easiest way to get my arms wrapped around it. And if you've never seen us talk about it before, you know, inside the IBM Storage House, we have something called a cyber resiliency assessment. So it's actually a funded activity that we pay for internally to do for our clients. And that sometimes will help give me the shape of, okay, well, what do I want to tackle? Like, what are some of the priorities I want to tackle first? And that type of thing doesn't actually spit out stuff like IBM product. It actually comes back with like, here's some of the process improvements. Here's technologies you may want to think about creating immutable copies, things like that. But getting my head wrapped around, if it's a journey for me already, like where do I start, and getting a point of view on some of the ways that I could start to improve my recovery posture. Those are the two things. And it's top of mind for me because I'm doing a bunch for some clients right now, because it's, you know, for them, it's planning into 2024. What do I want? What goals do I want to tick off in 2024? I start to get another voice to, I had these on my list. Oh, there's some other ones. So I'd say, yeah, iterative process, it's a journey. And then, yeah, we can do things like that cyber resiliency assessment that helps give you another lens of what I might want to do next.
Excellent. Dan, anything you'd like to leave us with?
So the problem with this webinar and the problem we had at the Accelerate webinar 2 days ago was we don't have enough time to really get into all the details. So we are going to do more and try to focus on subtopics. The one thing I would kind of like to leave in everyone's mind, if you look at the cyber warfare, the cyber attacks today compared to a year ago, the biggest thing is the cyber criminals are much faster from start to corruption or start to hitting the availability of your environment. We had some people do a test of attacking an Active Directory that was set up securely. And when they got full access to the environment, they just got one admin account. Within 18 hours, they had owned the AD. And so the only point I would make from that is everything's evolving, it's much faster, and that's where that tight integration of discovering the attack and responding has got to be equally fast. If only to stop the spread and lock things down and then figure it out. And since we're out of time, I'll just leave you with that. Other than thank you.
And Shu, anything you'd like to pass on to folks?
Yeah, I'll follow up on Dan's statement. So, we love to use the shock statement of it's not a question of if you get hacked, it's a question of when. I had a very crusty client say to me, well, if I'm going to get hacked, what's the point of investing in cybersecurity anyway? It's like, well, to Dan's point, how badly do you want to recover your data and how quickly? So the cybersecurity is going to give you that ability to protect more of your data, but more importantly, facilitate that fast recovery. So, if you ever get a client giving you pushback and saying, well, if I'm going to get hacked, I'm just going to leave it up to chance and figure out how to recover it. Well, no, you want cybersecurity too, to make sure that recovery happens quickly, efficiently, effectively. So, always remember, and I think, Chris and Dan have done a fantastic job over the years, and you too, Roger, that cybersecurity and cyber resiliency go hand in hand. It's not an either or. They need to be spoken about and talk to your clients with together because one's going to mitigate the other, or one's going to lessen the impact of the other if they're both designed and developed concurrently. So that's all I'll leave you guys with, and appreciate
That's a
everyone's
really good point. Yeah, thank you, everybody. That was a really good point, Shu. I agree.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I truly am grateful that you took a little time to sit down and share your knowledge and expertise with everyone. And I 100% agree. This is just, Chris, stating it's a journey is perfect because you will never reach the end. Everything continues to evolve. As Dan said, the criminals are getting faster, better, different. So what worked last year may need updating this year and again next year. So it is truly a journey. And gentlemen, with that, I thank you one last time. And Scott, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, everybody, for participating today. Thank you to our panelists for imparting all of your knowledge to us. I will end the recording, and again, it will be posted on our YouTube site. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me. So again, thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.